Alright, with Christmas Angels gone, it's now time for some New Year's Angels because New Year's is coming soon with another Angel deck, this time on the Faded One of Time, Liael Amorta, a Guardian Angel for basically Rezael. Don't know if I remember correctly, but in lore, she was the wife of Rezael, if I remember correctly, but for sure I know she is the lover of Rezael, which is why she became the Faded One of Time instead of Destined One of Time. So basically, it's her combined power with the Angel side of Rezael with her Dark Gear Chronicle counterpart to make one Gear Chronicle Angel Feather unit, which I actually really like. I really like the design of this unit, but this is the one deck I have not been way too sure about playing, mainly because on how it actually plays. But yet, I still kind of like the deck just for its design. And here I'm going to go on how the playstyle goes. So basically it just focuses around calling same name units. And that's one weakness of the deck already, because the fact that you need to call same name units means that you need to run multiple copies in a deck. And yes, I know in Vanguard most of the time you're going to run multiple copies, but for full-on consistency, you're probably going to need 3 to 4 copies of specific cards in a deck to make this deck function. And another thing that has been very iffy about this deck for me is that in a way it is a bit slow. And we'll explain why with the cards, especially with Liael Amorta herself. I have one more weakness to say about this deck. It uses a lot of soul, so watch out for that. And now let's begin with the deck profile with, of course, the Ride deck. So first off, here's the starter. Choose whatever starter you want, because you could actually pick whatever starter you wish. In which we go to the grade 1, which is Aldorphus, which, when rolled upon by the grade 2, you can Soul Blast 1, draw 2 cards, choose a normal unit from your hand, and discard it. That's fine, because it's going to relate to the grade 2, and you're going to recycle a lot from the drop zone in this deck, so that's not really much of an issue. But do also keep in mind that since you're discarding normal units, it can also be a key piece. In which we go to the grade 2, where when you ride a Liael on top of it, choose any number of cards from the drop zone and put it to the bottom of the deck in any order, and if you put at least 3, you draw a card. Yeah, here's what I mean where you want to discard those normal units, and considering that you're going to be discarding for the Ride deck anyway, it is possible for you to get 3 in the drop zone early game, but sometimes you probably won't because discarding triggers, but most of the time you're going to discard those normal units. In which we go to the Faded One of Time herself, Liael Amorta. So she has 3 skills. Her main skill is this first one where when she attacks you can counterblast 1, choose one of your rear guards and bind it. And then Superior Call same unit from your deck. Yes, basically she does get inherent multi-attack in the deck, basically a 4-attack deck because of this skill. But the part is that you have to call same name unit, so meaning now you have to run multiple copies of the same name unit. And say you don't run enough copies and they all go to damage zone, well, bad luck. The other thing about this is that this is the only multi-attack type unit, so meaning that the deck is going to go pretty slow. You're just going to be binding 1 unit per turn, practically, just to activate some of your stuff. And a good number of the cards in the deck wants a copy in the bind zone to activate. So the fact that you have to only bind once a turn is kind of pretty bad. But luckily the Divine skill does kind of fix it, because the Divine skill is that at the end of battle attacked, if your opponent's Vanguard is at least at grade 3, you can Superior Ride a copy of herself from the drop zone with a drive -1. Basically like a next stage but Superior Call from the drop zone. Pretty cool. And the cool part is that you can reactivate the first skill to bind another unit to basically do another Superior Call. So basically with the Divine skill turn, it is a 6 attack, which is actually pretty cool. Even though it's a drive -1, it's still fine. Basically your finisher turn, and that's your only really big turn, because it also combines it with the first skill, which is not a hard once per turn, so meaning that you can bind another unit. But over time, it's going to be kind of slow because you need to bind most of your cards to activate their skills, and it's only once per turn with that first skill. But anyway, it has the third skill where when placed on Guardian, you can put 2 cards from the bind zone back to the bottom deck, and you basically PG a Faded One. And yes, this works with Rezael, which was actually how it was originally meant to be, a Guardian Angel protecting Rezael. And funny enough, she could protect herself as well, which I do find pretty cool. And that's how most people see this card. It's a PG for mainly Rezael. But herself as a deck, I mean, it's a cool design deck, but overall, there's really not much to say about it other than it's kind of slow because the first skill, unless if you do Divine skill turn. But other than that, cool design. So that's it for the Ride deck. Now to the main deck. 3 more just for Persona Ride, and you do need them in the drop zone as well. Especially during a Persona Ride turn, you can actually Soul Blast the copy and then Superior Ride from the drop zone for the Divine skill, which is another key thing. And also because she has a PG skill herself, so having multiple copies of this is always good. And now the one card that actually makes this deck actually function nicely is the Gabwellius. Because Gabwellius, despite not having the bind skill, the fact that you could just place him by any means to Soul Blast 1 to look at the top card of your deck is very huge. And also, when he attacks, it gets himself plus 5k, but if you have at least 4 damage, you can Counter Blast 1 to give it 10k instead, and a drive check. So Rearguard drive check, which is just more pressure on top of Liael Amorta herself. And one thing I really like to do sometimes is with Gabwellius is that I would bind Gabwellius, Superior Call another copy with Liael Amorta, and then just use Gabwellius' skill to pick the top card of the deck so then Liael Amorta can ready her drive checks. It's something I really like about Gabwellius, and Gabwellius overall just works well with the Faded 1 decks, so you just have to run Gabwellius in this deck. So that's it for the grade 3 lineup to the grade 2 lineup. So first off, the main grade 2 is Idrius. So when you have a bind copy in the bind zone, it gets plus 10k, 20k attacker, and this is what I mean. You need your cards to be at the bind zone, but the fact that you can only bind once a turn kind of sucks because the other support kind of wants you to have more bind. But the second skill is that when he's bound, you can Soul Blast 1 to draw a card. And then choose one of your Vanguards, it gets plus 5k. That's not too bad either, and here's what I mean that Soul might get a little heavy because there's going to be a lot of Soul Blasting cards. But this is basically another one of your bind targets. Luckily, Gabwellius now kind of becomes another bind target in a way just so you can get a Superior Call Gabwellius. So it's not just this card, but this is more like an early game bind target than anything. But this is what I mean that Liael Amorta as a deck kind of sucks, despite the cool design, just because she can only bind once a turn because there's a lot of these bind zone type cards, and Liael Amorta is the only one that can bind. But overall, you must run 4 copies of this because it's one of your main early game cards, so you just have to run it. In which we run the Sequence Wizard, which is a new card, where you can Counter Blast 1 on place. You can look at top 5 cards of your deck to Superior Call 1 unit that is grade 3 or less. Always very helpful because the deck, in a way, always lacked a Superior Call engine, so this is actually very helpful to get a Superior Call engine. And the second skill is very helpful because when your other unit is bound by card ability, you can Soul Charge 1 and give itself plus 5k. That is pretty huge because that extra Soul is always very helpful, especially since, like I said, the deck does use a bit of a Soul, especially Gabwellius actually makes you use Soul as well. So having a way just to basically just Soul Charge it and just Soul Blast it, that's pretty nice. And this is not once per turn, so if you go Divine Skill turn, you can actually play this twice. But overall, it's just pretty nice because it lets you also plus, so you just really need this card in the deck. And then to another new support, it's 2 copies of Percentra. I might take this out for the Cycler because it kind of does the same thing where during your turn, if your bind zone has another copy of itself, give itself plus 5k. With the other skill that can self-bind itself, by the way, where when your Leo is placed on Vanguard, you can Energy Blast 3 to bind this card to draw a card. So basically, it's not much different from the Cycler, especially that this one has to be on the field compared to you just riding the Leo. Yes, on Divine Skill turn, you can make use of this to bind itself and draw, which is only a one-time use, by the way. But the other problem is that, yeah, you do need another copy bound for the 5k power buff, which is a okay thing, but Idrius already gets plus 10k, so that itself is better. And Energy Blast 3 to draw a card. Might just use the Cycler over this. But at the same time, you can use this as an early game attacker and then just bind to draw. So I might bump this up just for early game attack. And then when you ride the grade 3 Liael Amorta just to draw, which can be a nice little thing. But at the same time, this is not really that great. So I'm not entirely too sure about this card either. So I'm just running 2 for now. And speaking of the Cycler, just 2 more of these just because I only have 2. I might do 4 copies of the other card. Who knows? For now, this has been working out okay, so I'll just take it. And then one card I'm still testing out, but I might actually take out is the Order card. Because this one, on the Order zone, you can choose one of your rear guards that is not being attacked and then put it in the Guardian. So it's nice that you could actually just guard with the rear guards you have, which can even be Liael Amorta herself if she's on rear guard, and then basically just use her ability for a PG ability. And also it makes your trigger units into basically decent shield value units, and also it binds as well, so it can increase your bind count, and it could also increase the different type of bind units, which is also very key, which is why I'm kind of like this card, but at the same time it is slow because it binds on your opponent's turn. So I'm not too sure about running this at all, especially since there might be other important units, but so far this does work okay. I might just cut this down to 2. So that's it for the grade 2 lineup, and now to the grade 1 lineup. So first off, I run the Liael Amorta booster, becomes a 15 gauge booster for the Vanguard, but the unique skill is that you can Soul Blast one during the boost to return a same name unit as one on the field to the bottom of the deck. Basically it helps you recycle, which is very key because now you can superior call that unit again if you need it. Because sometimes they will end up in the drop zone or damage zone, so it does help. But once again, watch out for the soul. And then I run 2 Ishtar, just because when the same column unit is bound, you can restand it, which is basically a double booster unit, and considering that you're only binding one column anyway per turn, other than during Divine Skill, this is not really hard to pull off, hence why you just only really need 2 copies, because you just only need it in one column. And finally, Goragon and the Painkiller Angel, just because I do not have more copies of Saragon, and also because I only have 3 Goragons left and I do not have another one, so it's just how it is right now. But Goragon, when superior called by a Divine Skill unit, lets you get plus 5k power for itself, and also after attacks you can retire it to countercharge, so it's basically just a countercharge if you need it. Luckily I have not faced that many counterblast issues, but it is helpful if you need it, so I would say still run it just in case. In fact, 4 copies would actually be pretty nice. And finally, 4 PGs, because PGs. And then for the trigger lineup, OT. In a way, this one can get a little insane, just because even in a Divine Skill turn, you got your rearguard attacks as well. And additional rearguard attacks means more drag checks. And then 8 crits, 3 draws, so you can see your pieces as soon as you can. And finally, 4 heals, 2 being counter heals. So that's it for this deck profile on my Liael Amorta deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend, and what other changes would you make? So far, this deck is just a iffy deck to me. It's cool in design, especially Liael Amorta herself. And in a way, interesting little playstyle of focusing on superior calling same name units. Basically, someone from the present timeline coming from the future, but this time from the same name. Combination of basically Gear Chronicles and Angel Feathers, which is something I also like. I do like that Liael Amorta does come back in time just to become a guardian angel, which is something I like. But the fact that she herself is actually the key card to basically make all your cards work is a bit of an issue, because there's only once per turn, and that you also need multiple copies of a specific unit just to make your whole deck kind of function. And considering that you can only support 1 unit per turn, it kind of sucks unless if it's the Divine Skill turn. Although with the recent support, it did help the deck a bit, like giving you a board and even make use of Gabwellius to make this deck into a threat. But other than that, the deck is not really that great still. But something I do hope for is a new form of Liael Amorta. Considering what happened in the anime, where Gabwellius is infused with future Hikari, which is the user of Liael Amorta, considering what happened with Varga, with Sabilt, I'm hoping we get a Gabwellius with Liael Amorta, because that would actually be very cool to see, like an evolved form of Liael Amorta, especially something to actually help the deck. Like multiple binds in a turn would actually be very helpful. But in that, there's really not much to say about this deck, other than basically cool in design. And also in a way, this is not really budget friendly, just to tell you that right now, because Gabwellius is a little expensive and Liael Amorta herself can be a little expensive just for the PG effect. But in that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.